Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my presentation. My name is Courtney and I'm going to be talking about the gay and trans panic defense and how it is used to excuse murder through victim blaming. To start off, I'm sorry if I sound raspy or if I drink a drink of water through this. I am just getting over COVID and still not feeling my best. So thanks for bearing with me through that. The second thing I want to mention before starting this is I'm going to give an initial trigger warning that some of the content in this presentation is not for all parties. So I am going to be talking about two murder cases where this a legal strategy was used in the case, and it does get a little graphic just because I kind of want to get the picture out there. So if that's something that you can't stomach, I totally understand that. Thanks for coming anyways. So this might not be the best presentation for you to watch. I am going to be talking about it at the end, and I will give another trigger warning just before I talk about it. So what you can do is you can either bump out of it then, or you can fast forward and you'll be able to tell where we're at based on the pictures of the slides. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'm not sure about you guys, but I had never heard of this before. Probably, I want to say like 3 or 4 years ago, I was had heard of it. Um, so what is it? It's a legal strategy that asks a jury to excuse and legitimize the violent actions of the person who committed the crime based on the victim's sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, it can't be used as a standalone defense, but it is used to mitigate a case of murder to manslaughter or justified homicide through insanity or diminished capacity, provocation, or self-defense. So let's talk about these a little bit. And well, I'm going to be reading to you something directly from the LGBTQ Bar Association website. They're a really great website, a nonprofit organization, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to be reading how they explain these three things here. So to start off, we're going to talk about insanity or diminished capacity. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of when somebody, pleads insanity and, they can't be held responsible. So the defendant alleges that a sexual proposition by the victim, due to their sexual orientation or gender identity, triggered a nervous breakdown in the defendant, causing an LGBTQ panic. This defense is based on an outdated psychological term known as the gay panic disorder, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. It was debunked by the American Psychiatric Association, removed from the DSM in 1973. So sadly, while the medical field has evolved with our increasingly just society, the legal system is kind of lagging behind and it has yet to catch up. All right, next we have provocation. So defensive provocation is when the defense allows a defendant to argue that the victim's proposition, sometimes termed a nonviolent sexual advance, was sufficiently provocative to induce the defendant to kill the victim. Defendants claiming a provocative advance stigmatized behavior, which on its own is not illegal or harmful, but is only considered provocative when it comes from an LGBTQ plus individual. All right, last we're going to talk about self-defense, and I'm sure everybody's probably heard of this too. So this is when the defendant claims that they believe that the victim, because of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, was about to cause the defendant serious bodily harm. This defense is offensive and harmful because it argues that a person's gender or sexual identity makes them more of a threat to safety. In addition, the gay panic is often employed to justify violence when the victim's behavior falls short of the serious bodily harm standard, or the defendant used a greater amount of force than reasonably necessary to avoid such danger, such as using a weapon when their attacker was unarmed. So that's a little background about what it is and what it means. All right, next we're going to talk about the history. Um, so like I said, I had just heard about this a few years ago, and I thought this was a relatively new phenomenon, and it is not. So this person right here, his name is Dr. Edward Kemp. He is a doctor of psychiatry, and he first coined the phrase acute homosexual panic back in 1920. So he he used the term to diagnose a neurosis that was first noticed during World War I in same-sex barracks. He stated that the patient's continual proximity to members of the same sex and the negligible presence of opposite sex led to an aggravation of their latent homosexual desires. A little outdated, right? Um, so he defined it as a panic due to uncontrollable pressure of sexually perverse cravings. And he also classified the condition as an acute pernicious dissociative disorder. So if you're familiar with psychology, you probably know that when we say dissociative disorder, it means that a person has, they're not really in reality and they are kind of taken out of reality and brought somewhere else. So they're disassociating from their current world. Homosexual panic, as I stated before, is not recognized in the DSM anymore. It was removed in 1973, but it's still used within the legal system, implying that a defendant had a temporary loss of self-control and therefore they cannot be held accountable for his or her crime. All right, so what are some of the problems with the gay and trans panic defense? I'm sure you can come up with a few of your own. So here's what I listed here. So the continuality of this defense reinforces and perpetuates negative stereotypes towards the LGBTQ plus community. And it seeks to capitalize on unconscious bias in favor of heterosexuality and prevents the normalization of LGBTQ plus persons in society. Now, even if a jury doesn't acquit the defendant, they may still deadlock because they're just unable to shake the inherent homophobia of the defense. Now, this is a form of victim blaming, and it's completely barbaric to blame the crime on the victim in general, but especially when it's due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. Use of this defense continues to stigmatize the queer community and deems them to be less important. So, if you're putting yourselves in their shoes, I know I would feel like my life means less than those of a heterosexual. Queer people will continue to be more vulnerable to acts of violence, and they are already more vulnerable than non-queer people, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. All right, we're going to talk about a few opposing views, and while there's not many, they are still worth mentioning. All right, so mainly, opponents of the ban state that outlawing any kind of defense would set a bad precedent, and that's something that in the legal, it's just not something that they want, right? No bad precedent. Banning the gay and trans panic defense, they argue, won't actually work because arguments can still be made sub rosa, meaning in secret. So it's when you're saying something without saying it directly, so it can still, there's a way around it. And last, free speech expression cannot be suppressed. So a lot of people are, they argue that you can't take away someone's First Amendment right. Okay, let's talk about public opinion. And I decided to talk about public opinion on homosexuality. I took this information from a Gallup poll, and the last recorded data was in 2021, so I'm sure there will be some out soon. So what I did was I went back to 2004 and I took it up into 5-year increments so we can see how much we have, like how far we've gone during this time period here. So not today, but back in 2021, hopefully it's gotten a little bit better here. 69% of the public believed it to be morally acceptable, where 30% thought it to be morally wrong, and there was no opinion on 1%. So looking back to 2016, we can see that we have actually gone up here. So came from 60%, and then in 2009 we were only at 49%, 2004 at 42%. So there was a spike. There has been a very significant spike. So we're moving in the right direction, and we need to keep on this upward trend, right? Next, I want to talk about some legislation on the gay and trans panic defense, where we're at currently. Now, it is not legal in all 50 states to use this as a defense strategy, which is great, but we still have a lot of states to go. So what I did on the left here is I snapped this from the LGBTQ Bar Association website, and I put it here just so it's a little bit easier to kind of look at and put into perspective. So the red states are where it has been banned. You cannot use this as a defense strategy. The teal states are where there has been bills introduced, but they haven't actually gone through completely, not fully passed. Gray states are where there's nothing. There's no law saying you can't do that. The first state to ban it was California. California is generally more progressive than most other states, so they first banned it in 2014. So it took all that time to ban this defense. The last state, most recently, New Mexico, they actually banned it in 2022. So yay for New Mexico for joining along. And we can see we have some New England states. So we have Vermont and we've got Maine, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So New England is on an upward trend here, but we still have a couple blue states here, including New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So hopefully, Massachusetts follows up, and I want to talk a little bit about New Hampshire. So New Hampshire is moving forward, and I'm really happy about this. So in January of this year, the New Hampshire's House voted to outlaw the defense in a 223 to 118 vote, and the bill is now going to the Senate for a final vote. So fingers crossed that we get there, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. Next, I wanted to talk about the hate crime data, just so I can kind of show everybody how vulnerable people in the queer community are to hate crimes. To start, I wanted to let you guys know how many LGBTQ plus people are in the United States. So they make up 5.6% of the population in the US, which is, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 18.4 million people. That's a lot of people. In 2019, there was 1,656 recorded hate crimes against the queer community, and that was 18.8% of all hate crimes that year. I want to emphasize recorded. So I'm sure you're probably aware that not all crimes get reported, right? Well, especially crimes against the queer community. One of the reasons for that, and honestly, it's not the only reason, but it's a big reason, is that if somebody is a victim of a crime and let's say they're not out yet, then they know or feel as if they report to the police that they were a victim of a hate crime, that's where they get outed, and maybe they're not ready to do that. So that's just one reason why stuff doesn't get reported. 1 out of 4 transgender people and 1 out of 5 gay, lesbian, and bisexual people living in the US will experience a hate crime during their lifetime. That is a lot of people, considering, out of 18.4 million people. Now, if you live in a family of 4 or 5 and you guys are sitting at the dinner table having dinner, and just pretend like all of you were part of the LGBTQ plus community. Just think about one of those members of your family being the victim of a hate crime in their lifetime, and it's really hard to think about when you put it into perspective. To top it off, queer individuals are 4 times more likely to experience serious violence, including rape or sexual assault, robbery, and aggravated or simple assault, compared to non-queer people. All right, let's talk about media reporting. So the media is pretty non-biased or in favor, or what seems like they're in favor of banning this legal strategy. So if you just do a quick Google search and you type in gay panic defense and you click on news, the news tab, you can kind of read a few articles and see how generally they're pretty non-biased or in favor. Now, most people today, I'm sure, are aware that podcasts are a thing, and I love a good podcast. And if you're like me and you're interested in true crime, then you have probably heard of and or listened to one or all of these podcasts. So I have attached Morbid, Crime Junkie, Criminal, and Generation Why. And each of these podcasts and many other more that I didn't include on this slide, they have used their platform to discuss cases where there have been victims of hate crimes and that, the gay panic defense was either used or attempted to be used. So that brings me to the the cases. So here's the final trigger warning. I will be talking about these two cases for quite a few minutes. So if you've made it this far, that's awesome. If you want to leave, I totally understand. So, all right, let's get started. We're going to talk about when it has been unsuccessful. All right, so this gentleman, this is the case of Matthew Shepard, and this is Matthew here. And on the evening of October 7th in 1998, there was a college freshman named Aaron Kreifels who was taking a bike ride through Laramie, Wyoming, and he hit a rock near a fence and fell off of his bike. And as he was getting back up and brushing himself off, he looked at the fence and he saw something slumped down and tied to the fence post. And at first he thought it was a scarecrow or some kind of a Halloween prop because it was really close to Halloween. But something didn't sit right with what he saw, so he decided to get closer to investigate. And as you have probably predicted, what he found was not a scarecrow. It was a badly injured person. This person was barely breathing, very labored. The person was beaten so badly that they were beyond recognition. So Aaron gets up, takes his bike, goes to the first house he can find to call the police. The first officer on the scene was Reggie Flutie. And one thing I did want to mention that's not quite relevant to the case, but it's just something that's kind of nice. When she first came up to the scene, she saw a large doe that was laying very close to Matthew, the victim. And she was just sitting there and kind of watching. And when Reggie went up and got closer and closer to Matthew and knelt down to, try to help him, that's when the deer got up and kind of slowly trotted away. And she always thought that the deer was watching over him. So I thought that was just kind of a nice thing to mention in such a horrible, horrible case. So the next thing that she noticed, that there was so much blood on him that she couldn't even see his facial features or any skin. But the one thing she did see, that it was on both of his cheeks. The only place where there wasn't blood were where there were trails of his tears that washed away the blood. So Matthew was transported to a local hospital. He had no wallet on him. He was identified by his college ID card, which fortunately he did have on him. He was a student of the University of Wyoming. Matthew was moved to a trauma unit in Colorado because of the extent of his injuries, and the local hospital just couldn't handle it. Doctors at the trauma unit found that his skull was fractured in multiple places, and his brainstem was severely damaged. He was beaten with the butt of a gun. He was pistol whipped over and over and over again. At this point, investigators are like, I got to figure out who this person is. I need to figure out how to solve this case. It was horrible. So they did everything they could to find out who he was, and they found out that he was an openly gay college student. He had moved around throughout his life, and he had also previously been attacked because of his homosexuality. So super, super sad. Not to get into too many details, but there was a series of events that led investigators to two subjects who are shown down here. Those people are Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson. And soon the story about what happened that night came out, and it led to the arrest of these two men. So what they did was they talked to both of these men, and they tried to get one of them to break. So the first person they talked to break was McKinney. He told the officers that he and Henderson had met Matthew at a bar called the Fireside Lounge in Laramie, and the two decided for whatever reason that they were going to rob Matthew. And what they did was they pretended to be gay in order to make Matthew feel more comfortable with them. When Matthew was getting ready to leave, he was offered a ride by the two men, and he agreed to hitch a ride with them because he had, they had gained his trust. Now, at some point during the ride, McKinney alleged that Matthew put his hand on his leg, and that's when McKinney kind of freaked out, and he looked at Matthew and said, "Hey, we're not gay, and we're gonna jack you up." And that's when they started to beat him in the truck. Then they pulled him from the truck, they beat him more, tied him to the fence post, and just continued to pistol whip him over and over and over again. Matthew died from his injuries on October 12th. His parents were at his side. And now we're going to get into the trial. So the first of the two men to be tried for Matthew's murder was Henderson. So he was tried on April of 1999, and he reached a plea agreement that removed the death penalty as part of this conviction and in exchange for 2 consecutive life sentences. McKinney's trial proceeded in the fall of 1999, which is about a year after Matthew passed away. He took a similar plea deal after his attorney's efforts to mount the gay panic defense was ruled out by Judge Barton Boyd. Thank goodness, right? As a part of their plea agreements, the two were not allowed to speak to the media about the case, which was violated in later years. And both of these men remain in the custody of the Wyoming Department of Corrections, and they will be there for the rest of their lives, hopefully. Now, I know that was a really hard thing to listen to. It's something that still upsets me every time I hear it. But I did want to talk about some legacies that Matthew left. And I just wanted to leave his case on a lighter note because he left a lot behind for society, and he has helped society progress. So start off, I want to talk about Angel Action. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of that before, but it is a wonderful, wonderful group. So it started off because at both Matthew's funeral and at the courthouse where the 2 defendants were being tried, this group, which you can see them in the picture here, most of you have probably heard of them. They're called the Westboro Baptist Church. And basically they are a hate group that goes to different types of funerals and such and courthouses, and they protest all sorts of things. So they protest against homosexuality, transgender, abortion. They also protest the funerals of military personnel who have lost their lives. So they showed up at Matthew's funeral and at the courthouse, and these little signs here, that some of the signs that they held read "God hates fags" and "No tears for queers." And I apologize for that language. I honestly hate those words, but when it's used in that context. So I just wanted you to get an idea of some of the things that they were writing on their signs while picketing. So the protest led to Matthew's high school friend named Romaine Patterson to organize a counter protest group, which is called Angel Action. So what they do is as you can see, they dress up in these big white bed sheets, and they make these huge angel wings, and they make them taller than they are. And what they do is they just stand in a line in front of them and they counter protest. They mostly remain silent, but sometimes they do quietly sing, and they never engage with them. They just stand there. And what the goal is, it's to make it so that the family members don't have to see them. So it's a really wonderful group. They still tour the country today, and they counter protest the Westboro Baptist Church. And I love them. I love them so much. And it's such a beautiful thing that came out of Matthew's death. Next picture here is, that's Judy Shepard. That is Matthew's mother. And she started the Matthew Shepard Foundation in 1998 with her husband Dennis. And what the Matthew Shepard Foundation does is they run education and outreach and advocacy programs. So it's another really good cause that came out of his death. Last thing I want to talk about in this picture here. So in 2009, President Barack Obama signed a bill called the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act of 2009. And what this does is it grants more authority for federal investigations of hate crimes and includes legislation that protection for violent acts based on actual or perceived gender, their disability, their sexual orientation, or their gender identity. So again, his death was tragic, and I'm sure anybody would choose to have Matthew's life over these things, but his death did mean something. And again, his legacy has helped society progress quite a bit in terms of LGBTQ plus issues. All right, so one more case I want to talk about is a case where it was successful. So This is another horrible case. I'm going to be a little bit more brief about it, but the ending will probably make you mad, and I apologize for that. Okay, so this gentleman here was murdered by this person here. His name is Daniel Spencer. So let's talk about what happened. So this happened on December 21st, 2015, around 3 a.m. This guy right here, James Miller, he walked into the Austin Fleet Center about 3 a.m. And so the Austin Fleet Center is a place where they have a lot of like town city vehicles. So fire trucks, ambulance, and so on. So he told somebody that he needed to speak with an officer immediately. So officer was dispatched. When they arrived, he told the officer that he thought he had killed someone. So immediately the police go to the apartment where the crime took place. Police promptly open the door. They see a man on the floor not moving. The scene was incredibly gruesome. There was blood everywhere. And that man was Daniel Spencer. So they checked on Daniel, and he wasn't breathing, and he was passed away. He was deceased. Miller was obviously arrested immediately. And when police asked Miller what happened, he stated that he and Daniel were hanging out. They were drinking a couple beers, having a jam sesh, playing their guitars, and just, having a good time. And then he got kind of vague, and he said that when he was about to leave, stuff just happened. So Miller was to be charged with first-degree murder. His trial didn't begin until 2018. And again, this is in Texas, so it's legal to use the gay panic defense in Texas still. So Miller's attorney used a defense, and the judge allows it because Miller is claiming that he stabbed Daniel in self-defense. So again, it's not a standalone defense, but they're piggybacking off of the self-defense. So when Miller takes a stand, he's asked if him and Daniel got into a fight. He says nope, he was attacked. So this is the first time he's been detailed about what he says happened that night. So he claimed that he rejected a kiss from Daniel, and Daniel became incredibly angry and lunged towards him, threatening him with a glass, and that's when he stabbed Daniel. He had never, like I said, he had never mentioned this to investigators before. Now, after the prosecutor hears this story, the prosecutor just lays into him. So he pointed out that first, Daniel was stabbed in the back multiple times. So when someone is stabbed in the back, that indicates that person is trying to flee, that they're not attacking the other person. And the second thing was Miller also has 0 defense wounds that would indicate a struggle. So these two pieces of evidence would probably, sway a jury to think this is not an issue of self-defense, but that is not what happened here. So the jury hears the case. They deliberated for about 10 hours, and they came back with a verdict that shocked the entire nation. He was found innocent of both murder and manslaughter, and he was instead found guilty of negligent homicide, which carries a much lesser sentence. So Miller was sentenced to 6 months in county jail and 10 years probation. I'm going to say that one more time. 6 months in county jail, 10 years probation for murdering a person because of their sexual orientation. Okay, so what can we do to help ban the gay panic defense? There's a lot we can do, actually. So first, we need to take a stand and show solidarity with the LGBTQ plus community. We need to stand with them to show that we support them. They are equals to us. Protest and demand change. If you hear about a protest in your area, and it doesn't have to be specifically about the gay panic defense, but any kind of LGBTQ plus protest, don't be afraid to join them. The more we speak up, the more likely changes to happen. Support the LGBTQ Bar Association, which is, again, I use them as a reference for a lot of my stuff. They are a wonderful, wonderful organization. As I had mentioned before, they're a nonprofit, and they work to correct how the legal system continues to exploit members of the LGBTQ plus community. through the use of the Gay and Trans Panic Defense. So they're a really great organization. So if you have the means and you would like to, you can support them as well. They also offer legal advice. They're just a really great organization. But obviously not everybody can donate monetarily. So last thing, you raise your voice and contact both federal and state representatives. Call them, tell them how you feel about this, demand that they pass a ban, demand that they start legislation. And it doesn't have to just be your state. You can call any state you want, and again, federal as well. Now there's other things that can be done too outside of us as the public. There are things that can be done within the legal system, such as improving the voir dire process. And what that means is it's a process in which the judge and the lawyers, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, they select jury members and they weed them out and they try to find people who are non-biased and people who might also at the same time help their side of the case. So during this process, for example, there's questions like, do you know the victim? Have you ever met the victim? Have you ever seen anything on the media? So it's just a way to get the most non-biased jury that you can, but it's not a perfect process. And there has to be a better way to weed out people who are homophobic, transphobic, etc. And then on top of that, it needs to be reiterated during trial. Before the trial begins, it needs to be part of jury instruction, and they need to be held accountable when, they don't do what they're supposed to do. The last slide I want to show you, this slide is several pictures of members of the LGBTQ plus community who have had their lives taken from the world because of their sexual identity or their sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, the only person who is listed here or shown here who when the defendants went to trial, the gay panic did not work was Matthew Shepard. Everybody else, their murderers basically got a slap on the wrist or got away with it completely. You can also find a lot of names and some of these names as well on the LGBTQ bar website. There's a little slide, and if you just kind of scroll over to it, it'll give you a brief detail about these victims. Their lives mattered. They were going to go places in life, and because of how they felt against the same sex, or because of how they identified, they were killed for that. I could only fit so many pictures on this slide, but there are many, many, many more people who have lost their lives for that exact matter. So I just wanted to show you some of the beautiful faces of people who just lost their lives way too soon. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any questions or comments you want to make, you can mention them down below. Or if you want any further information about maybe some of the content or podcast suggestions, I'm happy to give those out too. I really appreciate you watching this. I know it probably wasn't easy to watch or easy to listen to, so I'm very grateful that you made it through with me. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great summer.